I've been hesitant to cover haunted house stories because they hit too close to home, literally. We all have to sleep somewhere, and these 3 submissions made me check every corner of my own house before going to bed. They're that disturbing. There's something uniquely terrifying about paranormal activity in your own home. When strange things happen in hotels or workplaces, you can leave. But when your house becomes the stage for unexplained phenomena, there's nowhere to run. Your sanctuary becomes your prison, and sleep becomes impossible. Tonight's 3 stories come from families who thought they'd found their dream homes, only to discover they weren't the only ones who wanted to live there. What you're about to hear will change how you think about every creak, every shadow, every unexplained sound in your own house. This story comes from Angela, a 35-year-old teacher who bought her first house in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon. She thought she was getting the deal of a lifetime until she learned why the price was so low. I'd been saving for years to buy my own place, and when I found the house on Maple Street, I couldn't believe my luck. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, beautiful hardwood floors, and a price that was almost too good to be true in Portland's housing market. The real estate agent, Janet, seemed eager to close the deal quickly. She brushed off my questions about why it had been on the market for 6 months, saying the previous owner had simply moved to be closer to family. When I asked about the home inspection, she assured me everything was in perfect condition. I should have been more suspicious, but I was so excited to finally own my own home that I ignored the red flags. I moved in on a Saturday in September. The first few days were blissful, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, making the space truly mine. But on my 4th night there, I was awakened by a sound I couldn't identify. It was coming from downstairs, a rhythmic tapping, like someone was gently knocking on wood. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed downstairs to investigate. The sound was coming from the kitchen, but when I turned on the lights, everything looked normal. The tapping stopped immediately. I figured it was just the house settling. Old houses make noise, right? But the next night, it happened again. Same time, around 2:30 a.m. Same rhythmic tapping from the kitchen. This continued for a week. Every night, 2:30 a.m., tapping from the kitchen that would stop the moment I investigated. I started keeping a baseball bat by my bed, even though I felt silly about it. Then things escalated. I was making coffee one morning when I noticed something odd. All the cabinet doors in the kitchen were slightly open. Not wide open, just cracked about an inch. I was certain I'd closed them the night before. I'm obsessive about keeping things tidy. I closed all the doors and went to work. When I came home that evening, they were open again. Every single one. That night, I decided to stay awake and watch. I positioned myself on the living room couch with a clear view of the kitchen and waited. At exactly 2:30 a.m., the tapping started. But this time, I could see what was causing it. The cabinet doors were opening themselves. One by one, they swung open with that gentle tapping sound as they hit their stops. Tap, tap, every door in the kitchen opening in sequence from left to right. I sat there frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. When the last door opened, everything went silent. Then I heard footsteps. Not the creaking of old floorboards, actual footsteps, like someone wearing slippers, walking across the kitchen floor. I could see the kitchen clearly, and there was no one there, but the sound of footsteps was unmistakable. The footsteps moved from the kitchen to the living room, getting closer to where I sat on the couch. I could feel the presence approaching, could sense something standing right in front of me, but I saw nothing. Then, in a voice so clear it could have been coming from someone sitting beside me, I heard an elderly woman speak. "Excuse me, dear, but I think you're in my kitchen. I've never been so terrified in my life." My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone as I called the police. But what was I going to tell them? That cabinet doors were opening by themselves and invisible people were talking to me? Instead, I called my sister and begged her to come over. I spent the rest of the night in my car, waiting for her to arrive. The next morning, with my sister there for moral support, I decided I needed answers. I called Janet, the real estate agent, and demanded to know what she hadn't told me about the house. After a lot of pressure, she finally admitted the truth. The previous owner hadn't moved to be closer to family. Evelyn Morrison, an 83-year-old woman who'd lived in the house for 40 years, had died there. She'd been found in the kitchen after suffering a heart attack while making her morning coffee. But that's not the worst part, Janet said reluctantly. The house has had ... issues since then. 3 different families have tried to live there in the past 2 years. None of them lasted more than a month. What kind of issues? Mrs. Morrison seems to... Well, she seems to think she still lives there. She doesn't understand that she's passed away, and she gets upset when people rearrange her house. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, upset? Janet sighed. Things get moved around. Furniture gets rearranged back to how she had it. The kitchen cabinets have to be left open the way she liked them, or she keep opening them all night. And she talks to people, trying to figure out why strangers are in her house. I was furious. And you didn't think I needed to know this before I bought the house? Legally, I only have to disclose deaths that occurred within the last 3 years if directly asked. Mrs. Morrison died 3 years and 2 months ago. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, looking at the cabinet doors that were now standing open again, despite being closed when I went to bed. I had a mortgage, a contract, and a ghost who thought I was trespassing in her house. That's when I decided to try something different. Instead of being afraid, I would try to communicate. That evening, I spoke aloud to the empty house. Mrs. Morrison, my name is Angela. I bought your house because I love it. I'm not here to cause trouble or change everything. Could we maybe share the space? At first, nothing happened. But around 2:30 a.m. I heard the gentle footsteps again. This time, instead of hiding, I stayed in bed and listened. The footsteps went to the kitchen, and I heard the familiar sound of cabinet doors opening. But then I heard something new, the sound of dishes clinking softly, like someone was getting a cup for tea. In the morning, I found a single teacup sitting on the kitchen counter, clean and perfectly placed. It wasn't one of my cups. It was delicate china with a floral pattern that definitely belonged to an elderly woman. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Morrison and I developed an understanding. I left her cabinet doors open the way she liked them. I bought tea that smelled like the kind an 83-year-old woman would enjoy and left it in a canister on the counter. I even bought flowers for the kitchen table because I noticed she always moved whatever I put there to make room for a vase that wasn't visible to me. In return, she stopped trying to scare me away. The footsteps became comforting rather than terrifying. Sometimes I'd find small things moved, a book placed on a different shelf, a throw pillow adjusted on the couch, but they felt like friendly suggestions rather than territorial warnings. One morning, I found a piece of paper on the kitchen table that definitely hadn't been there the night before. In shaky handwriting, it said, "Thank you for the tea, dear. You take good care of my house." I kept that note, and I kept living in Mrs. Morrison's house, because I realized it wasn't really a haunting. It was a home that had so much love in it that even death couldn't make that love leave. 6 months later, the footsteps stopped. I never heard Mrs. Morrison again, and the cabinet doors stayed closed when I shut them. I like to think she finally understood that I would take care of her house, and she was ready to rest. But I still buy her favorite tea, and I still leave the flowers on the kitchen table. Because sometimes, the most beautiful thing about a house isn't that it's yours. It's that it was loved by someone else first, and that love becomes part of the foundation. The house isn't haunted anymore. but it's still full of love. And honestly, that's exactly what a home should be. This story comes from Nathan and Paula, a couple in their early 30s who bought a 1920s colonial in New England to start their family. They got more than they bargained for when they discovered the house already had children living in it. My wife Paula and I had been trying to have kids for 3 years when we bought the house on Birch Lane. It was a 1920s colonial with original hardwood floors, built-in bookcases, and enough bedrooms to fill with the children we hoped to have someday. The house had been empty for almost a year when we bought it. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had moved to assisted living, and their adult children had been trying to sell the property. We got it for a great price because it needed some cosmetic work, but the bones of the house were solid. We spent our first month painting, refinishing floors, and making the house ours. Paula was especially excited about the upstairs bedrooms that would become nurseries. She'd stand in the empty rooms, planning where the cribs would go, what colors to paint the walls. It was during our second month there that we first heard the children. It started as soft giggling coming from upstairs, usually in the evening when we were watching TV in the living room. At first, we thought it might be neighborhood kids playing outside, but the sound was definitely coming from inside the house. "Did you hear that?" Paula would ask, and I'd listen carefully, but by the time I focused on it, the sound would stop. Then we started hearing footsteps. Small footsteps, like children running back and forth across the upstairs hallway. The footsteps would start suddenly, go on for a few minutes, then stop just as abruptly. Paula was convinced we had mice or squirrels in the attic. I called an exterminator, but he found no evidence of any animals in the house. The attic was clean. No droppings, no nests, no signs of wildlife. The sounds continued every night. Giggling, footsteps, and sometimes what sounded like children whispering to each other. We could never make out words, just the rhythm and tone of hushed conversation. It might have stayed at that level, strange but tolerable, if not for what happened next. Paula was having a particularly hard time with our fertility struggles, and one evening she broke down crying while we were having dinner. She was talking about how the empty bedrooms upstairs felt like a constant reminder of what we couldn't have. That night, for the first time, the children's voices were clear enough to understand. We were lying in bed when we heard them. 2 young voices, a boy and a girl, coming from the room directly above us. "Why is the sad lady crying again?" The girl's voice asked. "She wants babies like us," the boy replied. "But she can't have any. Maybe we could help her," the girl suggested. "We can't help," the boy said sadly. "We can't help anyone anymore." Paula grabbed my arm so tightly, it left bruises. We lay there listening to these children discuss our most private pain with the matter-of-fact tone that only children possess. "Should we talk to them?" the girl asked. "Mama said not to bother the living people," the boy replied. "But they seem nice. Nicer than the angry man who used to live here." That's when Paula sat up in bed and in a shaky voice called out, "Hello? Are you talking about us?" The voices stopped immediately. For several minutes, there was complete silence. Then, very quietly, the girl's voice said, "You can hear us?" "Yes," Paula replied. "We can hear you. What are your names?" Another long pause. Then, "I'm Emma. This is my brother Timothy. We've been living here for a very long time." Over the next hour, lying in our dark bedroom and speaking to the ceiling, we learned Emma and Timothy's story. They had lived in the house in the 1920s with their parents. Emma was 7. Timothy was 5. They had both died during the influenza pandemic of 1928, within days of each other. "We don't understand why we couldn't go with Mama and Papa," Emma explained. "We tried to leave, but we always end up back in our rooms." They had been in the house for almost a century, watching families come and go. Some residents had been kind, others had frightened or ignored them. The angry man they mentioned had apparently spent years trying to sage the house and force them to leave. "But we don't know how to leave," Timothy said sadly. "This is the only place we remember." Paula was crying again, but this time not from sadness. She was crying for these children who had been trapped in our house for nearly 100 years. "Are you lonely?" she asked. "Yes," both voices said simultaneously. That night marked the beginning of the strangest living arrangement I could have imagined. Paula and I became the caregivers for 2 ghost children who had been waiting almost a century for someone to acknowledge their existence. We established routines. Every evening, Paula would go upstairs and read stories aloud in the hallway. Emma and Timothy would listen quietly, occasionally asking questions or making comments. We learned that they could move small objects. They'd rearrange toys we left out for them, turn book pages, even play simple games like tic-tac-toe by moving pencils. Paula bought children's furniture for their rooms, small beds, toy boxes, even clothes that would disappear and reappear in different arrangements, like the children were playing dress-up. For the first time since moving into the house, Paula seemed genuinely happy. She had the children she'd always wanted, even if they weren't quite what she'd expected. But as months passed, I started to worry. Paula was spending more and more time with Emma and Timothy, less time focused on our relationship or our own lives. She'd come home from work and immediately go upstairs to check on the children. She bought children's books, toys, even groceries, like juice boxes and crackers that would disappear overnight. The turning point came when Paula announced she wanted to stop our fertility treatments. "We have Emma and Timothy," she said. "They need us. Maybe this is how we were meant to be a family." That's when I realized the situation had become unhealthy. As much as I'd grown fond of our ghostly housemates, they couldn't be a replacement for the life Paula and I had planned together. I tried talking to Emma and Timothy directly. I went upstairs one evening and explained that while we loved having them as part of our family, Paula needed to focus on her own life too. "We don't want to make the nice lady sad," Emma said, "but we don't know how to not need her. We've been alone for so long. What if we helped you find your parents?" I asked. "What if we helped you figure out how to leave?" Timothy's voice was very small when he answered, "Do you think Mama and Papa are still looking for us?" With Paula's reluctant agreement, we contacted a medium recommended by a local paranormal investigation group. During the session, the medium made contact with Emma and Timothy, but also with 2 adult spirits, their parents, who had indeed been searching for their children for decades. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking. We could hear Emma and Timothy crying with joy as they were reunited with their parents. The medium explained that the children had been held in the house by their own fear and confusion, but now that they understood their parents had been waiting for them, they could finally move on. "Thank you for taking care of our babies," a woman's voice said through the medium. "You gave them the love and attention they needed to remember who they were." That night, for the first time in months, the house was completely quiet. Emma and Timothy were gone, reunited with their family in whatever comes after this life. Paula grieved for them like they were her own children, but their departure also freed her to remember her own dreams. We resumed fertility treatments, and 8 months later, Paula got pregnant. Our daughter was born in the same upstairs bedroom, where Emma and Timothy had spent nearly a century waiting for someone to love them. Sometimes, when she's playing quietly in her room, I think I can hear the faint echo of children's laughter, but it doesn't frighten me. It reminds me that our house has always been a place where children are loved and protected. Emma and Timothy taught us that family isn't just about blood or even about being alive at the same time. Sometimes family is about being there for each other, even across the boundaries of life and death. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is helping them find their way home. Our final story comes from Garrick and Melissa. a young couple who bought a 1950s ranch house in suburban Detroit. They thought they were getting extra storage space in the basement, but they discovered someone else was already using it. When Melissa and I bought our first house, the basement was one of the selling points. It was finished with wood paneling, carpet, and enough space for a home office, workout area, and storage. The previous owner, an older man named Frank, had clearly spent a lot of time down there. There was a workshop area, a comfortable recliner, and even a small TV. Frank had lived in the house alone for over 20 years after his wife died. When he passed away from a heart attack, his son put the house on the market. We got a good deal because the son wanted a quick sale and the house needed some updating. The first few weeks were normal. We spent most of our time on the main floor, painting and updating the kitchen and bathrooms. The basement was functional as is, so we just used it for storage and left Frank's setup mostly alone. The first sign something was wrong came when I went downstairs to grab Christmas decorations from storage. The recliner, which had been facing away from the TV when we moved in, was now turned toward it. The TV was on, tuned to a fishing show. I figured Melissa had been down there and forgotten to turn off the TV. But when I asked her about it, she said she hadn't been in the basement in days. Maybe the remote got pressed accidentally when we were moving boxes, she suggested. That made sense, so I didn't think much about it. Until it happened again. Every few days, I'd go downstairs and find the TV on, always tuned to either fishing shows, old Western movies, or baseball games. The recliner would be positioned perfectly for viewing, and sometimes there would be an empty beer bottle on the side table. But neither Melissa nor I drank the kind of beer we kept finding, cheap domestic beer that we'd never bought. Someone's been in our house, I told Melissa after finding the third empty bottle. We changed the locks and checked all the windows. Everything was secure. We even set up a security camera in the basement, thinking maybe someone had a key we didn't know about. But the camera never showed anyone entering or leaving the basement. It just showed the TV turning on by itself, the recliner moving on its own, and beer bottles appearing and emptying without any visible presence. The strangest part was that whoever was down there had good taste in TV. I found myself looking forward to seeing what was on when I went downstairs. Sometimes I'd even sit and watch for a few minutes before turning it off. That's when Melissa suggested something that sounded crazy, but somehow felt right. "What if it's Frank?" she said. "What if he doesn't know he's dead?" We'd heard stories about the previous owner from neighbors. Frank had been a widower who spent most of his time in his basement workshop, watching TV and drinking beer. He'd been a quiet, friendly man who kept to himself, but was always willing to help neighbors with home repair projects. "He died down there," Melissa continued. "What if he's still just living his routine?" I decided to test this theory. The next time I found the TV on, instead of turning it off, I left a note on the side table. "Hi Frank, I'm Derek. This is my house now, but you can watch TV if you want." The next day, the note was gone, but there was a new note in different handwriting. "Thanks. Sorry about the beer." Old habits. Over the next few weeks, Frank and I developed a strange friendship. He'd leave notes letting me know when the furnace filter needed changing, or when he noticed a small water leak in the workshop area. In return, I'd leave him beer in the basement fridge and made sure his favorite TV channels were available. Melissa was less comfortable with the arrangement. She didn't like knowing there was a ghost in our basement, even a helpful one. "It's not natural," she said. "He should move on, not just keep living the same routine he had when he was alive." But I kind of liked having Frank around. He was quiet, helpful, and his presence made the house feel less empty when Melissa was working late. The situation came to a head when Melissa's sister came to visit. Janet was staying in our guest room, which was directly above the basement. On her second night, she came upstairs pale and shaking. "There's someone in your basement," she whispered. "I can hear him walking around, moving furniture, watching TV. I heard him cough. We had to tell her about Frank. Janet thought we were both crazy until she went downstairs and saw a fresh note from Frank, welcoming her to the house and apologizing for any noise. "This is insane," Janet said. "You're living with a dead person. You need to get rid of him." But as time went on, I realized Janet might be right for a different reason. Frank wasn't haunting our house maliciously, but he also wasn't moving forward. He was stuck in the same routine he'd had for 20 years, and that wasn't healthy for anyone, living or dead. I decided to have a serious conversation with Frank. I left a long note explaining that while I enjoyed his company, I was concerned that he was keeping himself trapped in old patterns instead of exploring whatever came next. His response was honest and heartbreaking. "I know I'm dead, but I don't know what comes next. And this basement is the only place I've been happy since my wife died. I'm scared to leave." That's when I understood. Frank wasn't haunting our house because he was angry or territorial. He was there because he was afraid and lonely, and the basement represented the only stability he'd known in years. Melissa and I researched grief counseling for spirits, which sounds ridiculous, but apparently exists. We found a spiritual counselor who specialized in helping earthbound spirits resolve their unfinished business. During the session, we learned that Frank had been carrying tremendous guilt about his wife's death. She'd wanted to travel, to see family more often, to do things outside their comfortable routine. But Frank had always put off those plans, saying they could do them next year or when I retire. When she died suddenly, Frank felt responsible for all the experiences she'd never had. He'd retreated to his basement and stayed there until his own death, never forgiving himself. The counselor helped Frank understand that his wife wouldn't want him to stay trapped in guilt and isolation. Through the medium, his wife actually came through with a message. She was waiting for him, and she wasn't angry about the trips they'd never taken. She was proud of the life they'd built together and ready to explore whatever came next with him. Frank's goodbye was simple. He left one final note. "Thanks for the beer and the friendship. Tell anyone who moves into the basement that the water heater makes noise but works fine, and the TV remote is temperamental. Take care of each other." That night, the basement felt different. Empty, but not in a sad way. More like a space that was ready for new memories, instead of being stuck in old ones. We converted Frank's workshop into a home office, but we kept the recliner and TV. Sometimes when I'm working late, I'll put on a baseball game or a fishing show, and it feels like I'm honoring the memory of a friend rather than being haunted by a ghost. Frank taught me that sometimes people get stuck, not because they're evil or angry, but because they're afraid or don't know how to move forward. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone find the courage to take the next step, even when you can't see where that step leads. Our basement isn't haunted anymore, but it's still a comfortable place to spend time. And every now and then, when I'm watching baseball and drinking a beer, I like to think Frank found his way to wherever his wife was waiting, and they're finally taking all those trips they never got to take together. These three stories remind us that not all hauntings are about fear or anger. Sometimes they're about love that refuses to let go, loneliness that needs acknowledgement, or simply not knowing how to move forward. Angela learned that sharing a space with a spirit could be about respect and mutual care. Nathan and Paula discovered that helping others find peace can heal our own hearts in unexpected ways. And Derek found that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone, living or dead, is help them find the courage to take their next step. The next time you hear an unexplained sound in your house, before you assume the worst, consider that it might be someone who needs help, understanding, or simply recognition that they existed and mattered. Because sometimes the most powerful thing about a haunted house isn't the fear it creates, but the love it reveals. Love so strong that it transcends death, and compassion so deep that it can bridge the gap between the living and the departed. Thanks for listening, and remember, if your house is haunted, it might not be a curse. It might be an opportunity to learn that kindness doesn't end with death, and that sometimes the most profound healing happens when we choose understanding over fear. Sweet dreams, and may your home be filled with love, whether it comes from the living or the dearly departed.